Hello and welcome to another episode of Taylor Talks Comics. Today we are going to go over the Frank Miller's Daredevil Artist Edition by IDW. Stay tuned. Alright, thanks for watching. Thanks for joining me. Be sure to give the video a thumbs up if you like it, and subscribe if you haven't already. Comment down below. I always like talking to the commenters about comics. And real quickly, I have a promo code with Organic Price Books. If you go to organicpricebooks.com, you can find great books like this one. And if you use my promo code Taylor Talks Comics, you can save $2 off any order. And that's what you'll want to use if you're ordering 1, 2, or 3 books. If you plan on ordering 4 or more books, though, you'll want to use my other promo code, which is TTC Ship It Together. TTC Ship It Together. That'll save you 5% off your order. All right, so today we have the Frank Miller's Artist Edition by IDW. This was recently reprinted. It was previously released with the different title. It's called the Artifact Edition before. I'll explain a little bit about that, but besides that different naming nomenclature, I guess, it's the same book. So it is basically just a reprint. But these artist editions are always great. I always like to show off some quick size comparisons of books, just to give you an idea of how large these books can be. So this is a standard size trade paperback. It'll be the same size, trim size as your normal single issue comic book. You can see it's much larger than it, much wider. Here is a deluxe edition from Image Comics, which is the same trim size as a DC Absolute. You can see it's much bigger and wider than Still. And let's grab a omnibus. So this is a DC Omnibus, same trim size as a Marvel Omnibus, and you can see that the artist edition is much bigger than it. So that's just to give you an idea of how large this can be, and why it's so big, excuse me as my table moves there, is that these are printed to be the same size as what the artist drew their comics on. So this is truly these books are truly put together to give you an idea of what it would be like to own the original art from these artists. Scott Dunbier, shout out to him, is the kind of the project manager of these artist editions. He's the one that puts them together and hunts down all his original art and does a great job with this. So it's Scott Dunbier's had a lot of great contributions to the comic book industry, but this is to be number one for him. So these end papers are just blown up panels of original art scans, as you can see. I believe the back end papers are different too. I always love when books have different back-end papers. It's all done on this beautiful, crisp, thick matte paper. And then here's the indicia. All the special thanks down here. These are all the people that have contributed, that own the pieces that are scanned in here. And I guess that's maybe they also helped track down some of it and whatnot, but you'll see some famous names in here too that own some of these pieces. And then here's the table of contents. So here's what makes this different. So this used to be called an Artifact Edition. So IDW had kind of two distinctions. They had an Artifact Edition and an Artist's Edition. The Artist's Edition, that title was named, they're both the same kind of book. They're both just big collections of original art. However, the Artist's Edition collected like sequential story. So you would get like all the original art pages for a whole entire issue of comics or graphic novel of comics or what have you. So you can actually, the Artist Edition itself could be a reading experience where you can actually read a whole story. The Artifact Edition was where they couldn't find complete stories, so they just kind of cobbled together as much original art as they could into one collection. Why they changed that delineation and got rid of the Artifact Edition name, I'm not sure. It was kind of nice to have the two distinguished, because then when you're hunting down artist editions, you'll know whether or not you're going to be able to read a complete story in that fashion or not. And I do like the reading experience of reading it with the original art, and you can't necessarily do that with this one itself, but regardless, that's the distinction there. So here you have all the credits too, written by Frank Miller, additional scripts by Roger McKenzie, David Michelini, art by Frank Miller and Klaus Janson. Klaus Janson's an important note here because Klaus Janson was the inker on a lot of Frank Miller's Daredevil comics, but also the finisher on a lot of them. Because by the time that Frank Miller started writing it, he was kind of separating himself to just doing like layouts and most of the figure drawing and whatnot, but then he'd leave the finishing, the ink jobs and like the more detailed parts of the backgrounds and the zip-a-tones and that kind of thing. You'd leave that for Klaus Janson. There are additional inks by Terry Austin and Joseph Rubinstein, letters by Joe Rosen, and additional letters by Diana Albers, John Costanza, and Jim Novak. And then about this edition, Frank Miller's Daredevil Artist Edition is a part of an ongoing series, one dedicated to showcasing extraordinary artists in a format as special as their work deserves. So this is the first page we're going to get. So these are done in full color. And a lot of people are like, what do you mean full color? Because they're black and white. You're just getting the inks and pencils. They're full color scans. And the reason why they do that is because they want you to be able to pick up on any of the little distinguishing notes and factors. Like this is the original artboard. You can see all the little notes at the top. You can see the paper as it's yellowing and aging. We'll see, as we flip through here, you'll see distinguishing pages where some of them have aged and yellowed a little bit more than others. You know, that could be anything from the people that own the original art maybe not taking care of it as best as the ones that have the wider pages, maybe keeping them in the sun or keeping them, you know, smashed under a stack of papers or whatever it is. Because a lot of the original art and the tools they were using, the pins and zips and things like that, weren't archival, especially zip-a-tones. They weren't archival in nature, so they weren't really made to be kept and preserved on original artwork such as this. So this is one thing I want to point out. But you'll see too, like all the little pieces that get touched up and scanned whenever these pages are scanned and colored, and before you see the printed page, you'll see those little idiosyncrasies, little things that make this special, like paste ups and whiteouts, to where they had to correct things before it went to print. And those things could be anything from the artist noticing, like maybe on the letter on this page right here where they pasted up the B over Billy Club. Maybe he didn't like the way the B was shaped and he wanted to redo it, or maybe he made an error and he wanted to paste over that and finish it. When I say zip-a-tones, though, those are like the little textures in the back here. You can see a lot of them on the buildings here. This page here, yeah, Klaus Janson was doing the ink, so this could be Klaus Janson doing those zips. And that's literally, like, Cartoonist Kayfabe, I always shout them out because they're a great YouTube channel. They've actually done videos on the process of doing a zip, and it's literally a sheet of paper that you have to cut these little shapes out around those little spots and then piece them in there, and it just gives it a little bit more texture and vibe to it. So you'll notice that it looks like these steps here have a little bit of whiteout on them. Maybe the lines there were redone. But it's great too because you're seeing, this is a great book because you're seeing the progression of artwork from Frank Miller. Frank Miller is one of my all-time favorite artists and creators in comics. A lot of great action sequences is what he was known for. But in the beginning, I know that he really, one of his great mentors was Neil Adams. And there's a great story, I think it's in the introduction of the Marvel Universe by Frank Miller, Omnibus, which I do have a video of, I'll try to link above, showing that omnibus off. But where he would go to Neil Adams once a week with his artwork, his portfolio, and have Neil Adams would kind of like, he would say kind of like tear it apart, just like draw all over it and show like, you're doing this wrong, you're doing this wrong. This page has a lot of zip-a-tones all over that page. And then it was like kind of a crash course. And as every week that Frank Miller went to Neil Adams would sooner or later have less and less critiques to make until Frank thought he was good enough to do it. And I think Frank Miller's first work with Marvel was a John Carter Warlord of Mars issue. But then he went on to do some Spider-Man stuff. And then his first big run was this Daredevil run. And he was a part of his studio space that had at one time it had it had Frank Miller working on Daredevil, it had Walt Simonson working on his Thor run, and it had Howard Chaykin working on American Flag, all in the same studio, which is amazing to think that. Here's a great iconic image that has been homaged and referenced in other previous or other runs in the future. Like the one that sparks to mind is X-Force by Rob Liefeld. I know he has that scene that he, admittedly, I mean, he doesn't hide the fact that he swiped that from that, I guess. But yeah, you can see these are all yellow pages. You'll even see little notes too, which is like color zip. So you'll see like little notes that as Frank Miller is drawing this page, he'll have little notes for the inker or the colorist of how he's viewing what's happening in these scenes. But yeah, Frank Miller's Daredevil, though. So he started off, and it has a very much a Neil Adams feel to it. His artwork is very much like Bill Sienkiewicz. I talk about this a lot on my channel, how both Frank Miller and Bill Sienkiewicz, in their early works with Marvel, they really have like that kind of Neil Adams art style. Neil Adams was such a groundbreaking artist for comics that he had all these people that were inspired by him. So Frank Miller and Bill Sienkiewicz, their early work with Marvel very much looks Neil Adams-esque. But then they both veer off into such signature styles, completely different from each other, and completely divorced from the Neil Adams style. But it's almost like Neil Adams is like, you have to follow the rules before you can break the rules kind of thing, which is something that my acting teacher in high school always talked about. This face right here looks very Ditko-like too. A lot of the inspirations back here, especially during this run, obviously Neil Adams, like I said. I think Steve Ditko is a parent in here. I think Bernie Krigstein, the famous EC comic artist, you can see a lot of his inspiration in Frank Miller's artwork. And then Will Eisner. And that's a lot of the inspiration with Frank Miller in comics was Will Eisner, not just from an art style, but also storytelling. Because Frank Miller's always been into that kind of hard-boiled crime noir kind of comics, which is what he did with Daredevil here. He wanted to take Daredevil, who was a comic that was not doing so well on the racks, and he wanted to make it more of a crime noir story mixed in with a lot of the martial arts stuff that Frank Miller was enjoying from like the kung fu craze in the film scene back in the 70s, but also like manga. And I don't know if Frank Miller I don't know what the access to manga was back then that he had. This is another iconic image here of Bullseye killing Elektra. Spoiler alert, but I had to show that off. I don't know what the access to manga was though back then, but Frank Miller, I think it was obvious that he had somewhat. I don't know if he maybe traveled to Japan. If you know the answer to that, let me know in the comments. Here's a great double page splash with great lettering too. Yeah, it looks like Joe Rosen is probably sorry, bumped the camera there. Probably the letterer on all of that, but you see like this fight choreography by Frank Miller, and I've always cited like Jack Kirby as my favorite fight choreographer in comics. I think you especially look at Jack Kirby's like Silver Age run on Captain America, which I think I've done an overview of that omnibus too on my channel. Those fight scenes were just incredible as well. And there's a few scenes in the Jack Kirby's Eternals I would cite as like great fight choreography. If you want examples of what I'm talking about when Jack Kirby's great at that. The next great one, which great artist that was great for fight choreography, was Frank Miller in this run. And that didn't go away. Frank Miller, his fight choreography is apparent in his Sin City run, in Dark Knight Returns, and those kinds of things. And those are the runs where he's really starts to veer off into that signature Frank Miller style. You still see a lot of the Neil Adams-esque figure drawing and stuff throughout this Daredevil run. But then when he goes to DC and does Ronin and Dark Knight Returns, it's really pretty incredible what he does. And one thing too that I think inspired Frank Miller from manga was the quicker paced story, more sparse on the dialogue, and more silent panels of just action. because his Daredevil run, when he becomes the writer and artist, really becomes quite a quick read, which is different for that Jim Shooter era of comics, where things were a little bit more drawn out, a little bit more heavy on the dialogue. So we have a pull-out page on this one, which is always a treat when you get these in artist edition, and that's a great. I don't know what this was originally used for. It says a portfolio on it. So I wonder if this was a kind of an art book that came out. But this was a later drawing by Frank Miller. I want to say it's after his run. And maybe even after he goes to DC for Ronin and Dark Knight. But let me know in the comments if you know where this piece comes from. But I do know they used this piece for the recent cover of the reprint for the Frank Miller Omnibus. So great pull out there. This was done on duo shape paper, which is another similar style to Zipatone, but a little bit different. Duo shade is used a lot in the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles run by Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird. Oh, I guess this pulls out too. On that side. And Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird are, they've been no strangers to admitting that their TMNT was very much inspired by Frank Miller's Daredevil run, even to the point that their origins kind of mix in that first issue of TMNT. So this is some extra pages. So that was all the Daredevil stuff. This, we're going to see pages from the Amazing Spider-Man Annual 15. Looks like we have 4 pages there. 2 pages from Bizarre Adventures 28. And then 4 pages from the Wolverine miniseries that he did with Chris Claremont, which inked by Joseph Rubinstein. And those pages are amazing. I'm so glad that they included those. So that's another treat, too, to these artist edition. This one's called Daredevil by Frank Miller, but they do add in some extra stuff. So this is cool. You get like the newspaper layout that he did mixed in there. Still kind of working in that crime, hard-boiled crime noir style. It says this is... I don't know if the date on the newspaper matches the date that this came out, but this would have predated his Daredevil run, I believe. I don't know. Another newspaper layout there. That's pretty cool. Using newspaper to tell the story. Great image of Elektra here. This is where his figure drawing and even like the hair is reminiscent of what we'd see in like Sin City later on. Oh, this is the Bizarre Adventures 2-pager. This is amazing. This is like one of my favorite 2-page spreads ever in comics, period. This is from the Wolverine miniseries with Chris Claremont. Absolutely fantastic story. It lasted 4 issues, and then there's 2 more issues of X-Men that kind of bring in the whole story together. So whenever you get a collection of that miniseries, usually it comes with those 2 X-Men issues. But Wolverine busting out of this window to fight all these ninjas. Just amazing stuff. And you get 2 more Wolverine pages here. Again, just like the widescreen fight choreography. Widescreen comics was something that they started talking about with like Brian Hitch in the early 2000s. But you can see Frank Miller was doing that way earlier. Now we're going to get some covers by Frank Miller, which is great. Elektra Saga, Peter Parker. Yeah, so... Oh, even a Comics Journal cover. We're going to get in here. These are great, too, because you see all the trade dress on it, too, that's been pasted over Frank Miller's artwork. So you imagine Frank Miller's artwork, he just did it on the board, and then they pasted up all the Marvel Comics group and Daredevil lettering there. You can also, like, notice, too, with these artist edition, like, just the highlights used with, like, whiteout to really bring those figures and the artwork, like, kind of bring it to, like, a 3D kind of effect to make it really pop. Definitely see that on here on the highlights of the lightning, which is the cover image of the artist edition itself. But you can see the original cover here, which is great. But yeah, the lightning is done with this whiteout highlights, which is just amazing. And you imagine, I mean, this is the first time we saw Frank Miller use that effect. And then it's obviously on the iconic image of Dark Knight Returns, that cover of is that the first issue of Dark Knight Returns? The cover image using that lightning strike. That one's more vertical. But you also see a lot of the rain coming down. That's a an effect that you'd see in a lot of Will Eisner comics for sure, but then also Bernie Krigstein comics as well. Daredevil goes berserk. I love the lettering on that. Yeah, that lettering's pasted up too, so I'm imagining that the letterer of that issue did the lettering there, not Frank Miller. But sorry for that background noise. My cat just knocked over a bunch of stuff. I think she's okay though. Yeah, she's fine. Okay, so then we have this page here. Great cover image here. They don't make covers like they used to. I think covers in the 70s and 80s of comics were really a lot more iconic than they are these days. And then I think this was the image they used for one of the omnibus covers too. Possibly the DM cover, and maybe that one image I showed you earlier was the standard edition. Great image here too of him, we see Matt Murdock maskless, hugging the tombstone of Elektra. No more Mr. Nice Guy. I wonder if that lettering there, since it's done in pencil, I wonder if that's done by Frank Miller. Oh, here's some notes too on the bottom. I don't know if you can see that. Yeah. So just a very dark background. BR2, BR3, question mark, with highlights on gun barrel, the underside, the gun nozzle, DD's arm, fingers, nose, head. Maybe white lettering. No more Mr. Nice Guy. And maybe we should tie in the highlight color with a logo. Klaus. So, I wonder if that's, so is that written from Klaus then? I wonder if Klaus Jansen's giving those notes to the colorist. Yeah, that must be, because there's another one over here. So that's not Frank Miller writing these notes. That's actually Klaus Jansen. So I wonder if Klaus Jansen, that's his lettering then. I always love when they play with the logo too. To where they don't just keep having the same logo, but they actually play with it where it's shattering in that image there. And then some more covers. Oh. Oh, there's a couple of the Wolverine covers. I can't believe those are still in here. Pretty amazing. That's the image that they used for the Spider-Man omnibus, or the Marvel omnibus by Frank Miller that I said I have a video on. That's the image they used for that, which is, it's really interesting seeing it in the original art because I've only ever seen the colored image. But you can see are those zips? Yeah, so on Spider-Man's webs, they use Zipatone. So again, when I said they use Zipatone, like they have to literally cut out each of those little slits out, because the Zipatone paper, here's a good example too, because there's zips in the background here. That's like the whole page of Zipatone. And then they have to cut out all the little pieces that they want to cut around the figure of Daredevil. So imagine cutting the zips on just his webbing on there. That's why the webbing and the eyes around Spider-Man look lighter than they do on the inks there. It's pretty amazing. And then, oh, here's a Doctor Strange pinup in the back. Oh, here's more pinups. Okay. Official handbook. How sad for Doctor Strange. For a series that never came to fruition. All right, so watch for the new adventures of Earth's Sorcerer Supreme as mystically conjured by Roger Stern and Frank Miller. I never knew that. I never knew Frank Miller was going to do the art on a Doctor Strange book written by Roger Stern. That would have been amazing. And totally different than anything that Frank Miller really is known for. Here's some pinups of Wolverine and Bullseye, Daredevil and Elektra, and then his biography. So that's that. Great book. I love these artist editions. They're great studies too. If you're an artist yourself, you have to start picking these up because they're just great to see the craft that the artists work in with the page size that they work in, because these all get shrunk down before they get printed for the comic. So imagine, like I said, like the single issue comic is like this size. So you draw it on this big piece of paper and then you shrink it down for the comic. That's what this is really showing off, because these, like I said, are on the size of the paper that they drew on. But great work by Scott Dunbier and IDW. Keep these coming. I know later this year we're going to have a Frank Miller, David Mazzucchelli, Batman Year 1 artist edition, which I cannot wait to have in my hands. I think it's one of the greatest comic books of all time. Thank you guys for watching, though. Give the video a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. And comment down below. I always reply to comments. I love talking to you guys. And then remember, if you shop at organicpricebooks.com, use my codes $2 off if you want to use the code Taylor Talks Comics, or you can save 5% off your order if you order 4 books or more using TTC Ship It Together. Thank you guys. Keep reading, buying, and making comics.